Yesterday, I recorded a podcast with a big creator in the fintech category. He bumped into an article I wrote about a month ago called "The SEO Apocalypse." That article was some commentary on publishers in the kind of financial services arena, companies like NerdWallet and Bankrate and some others that have seen their organic traffic decline as a result of the changes Google's been making to SEO that are related to the AI search changes that they've been making. But the host was asking me a set of questions on how companies that were impacted by this should respond and react. But I've had an evening to reflect on it, and I came up with some observations here, and just organizing my own thoughts on the topic. There turned out to be meta points because what I realized in the conversation is there's no easy answer. If your distribution can be disrupted by Google's algo change, then there were more fundamental problems in your distribution strategy. And that's kind of where I went in my conversation around what makes a good distribution strategy, what makes it durable. And that's what I want to talk about today, is some of the observations I had on that. If you're curious on particularly in SEO and how folks should react to that, that's not what I'm going to be talking about today. I think today's episode is going to cover more timeless principles in marketing. So before I get into it, I want to pause and acknowledge and thank sponsors for the podcast. So we have Fintel Connect, an affiliate marketing platform. We have Spinwheel. They host a collection of APIs for lenders and publishers. We have CTB1, a boutique talent agency that helps companies recruit credit and marketing talent in consumer lending. And then we have Fiat Growth, and they have a full service marketing agency. They run the gambit from affiliate to paid search to social to a number of other businesses. So if you're on the market for some help, please consider reaching out to our sponsors. I'll put the links to their businesses in the show notes for the podcast. Also, while I'm on sponsors, just to make you aware, we do our sponsorships once a year. It's a decision we made. Nick and I made this decision earlier this year, and we determined we did not want to be in the business of contacting sponsors every week, every month, and determining who's in, who's out. Is just too much overhead for our liking, and it's just candidly not worth it for us given the scale of our publishing business. So what we decided to do is we're going to assign 4 sponsors for the entirety of the year, and we are currently looking at sponsors for 2026. So if you are a company, whether you're a service business or a technology business that serves consumer lenders, this outlet could be a good one for you. You'll get coverage in both our newsletter and our podcast. And reach out to me if you want more details on that. I'll put my email in the show notes. So back to the topic at hand here. And I'm calling today's episode Media versus Brand Arbitrage. I want to recap the key points because there was a certain amount of nuance that wasn't clear enough to me before the interview that became clear afterwards, that I've since kind of distilled into 8 key points, maybe 9, and then just a few takeaways of like, hey, so what do I do with this if I'm a fintech marketer? The big idea is if you can arbitrage attention, i.e. you can acquire it at a cost that is less than what you can monetize it at, then you're going to grow. That's kind of the very simple framework I use when I think about marketing. I apply that to my own business and when I think about paid versus organic content. So connected to that big idea, I think there's 2 ways to go about doing this. One, we're going to call media arbitrage. And I think this distills down to just asking for the close. Okay, so what's an example of a media arbitrage? I buy a click on Google for $1 and I think I can monetize it at $2 because I know the CTR and I know the landing page conversion and I know the sales rate and I know the lifetime value of that customer that I get. And when I do all that math, that click's worth $2 to me today and I get bought it for $1. So that's media arbitrage. And generally you're asking for the close there. And then I'm going to call this brand arbitrage. And then I'm just going to define this as giving in some form. But I think that's it. I actually don't think there's more to marketing than that on a conceptual level. So most companies do a mix of this. But when I look at fintech lending, I think fintech lenders tend to be very heavily weighted on the media arbitrage side, buying clicks on Google, buying clicks on Facebook, sending direct mail pieces, even affiliate marketing. I would argue maybe there's a bit of brand arbitrage there, but it's mostly media arbitrage because the affiliate's willing to sell you a new account. That's the game I see most fintech lenders playing today. And I actually think that's somewhat natural. I think a lot of businesses start there. But let's get into some of the observations I had post this podcast to break this down further. So one, as I think about organic traffic, the host asked me at one point, well, what's going to happen to their organic traffic? Is it going to come back? Something about the way he said it made me pause and say, and just think and reflect that there really isn't any organic traffic. There's not, people never just show up at your doorstep for free. Or at least I've not seen it in business. Organic traffic that shows up on a website, for example, is usually the result of giving away content for free for years, or it's spillover from paid channels. Maybe it's TV, maybe it's Facebook paid ads, maybe it's content that you spent money and time developing, maybe it's word of mouth from an exceptional product or experience you put together. But it's not free, that's for sure. It's not free. Even SEO in the good days, you had to think about keywords and write a lot of content and publish. So there was real time and effort and money that went into the websites and the pages that led to that SEO outcome, especially in the modern era. So that is certainly a form of media arbitrage. The next observation is that media arbs can be very quick to build, but they can also be very fast to die. Classic one, I can fire up a paid search. I've done this in a weekend, literally, for businesses I've been playing around with. You can spin up a landing page, go into Google AdWords, register your landing page, and then start buying clicks on certain keywords. It takes about, honestly, I would say 48 hours. It's pretty fast. And that's going from nothing. You don't have a website, you don't have a product, to building it and running paid media onto it. That's incredibly fast. And the reason that's fast to die is someone else can find you, outbid you, provide something better, and then if that happens enough, all of a sudden you're priced out of the market. You're not willing to pay enough to show up and outbid the competition. So those can be short-lived, those arbitrages, but they're nice because they can get a business off the ground from scratch. You don't need any kind of brand or consumer recognition to do that. SEO was this was a weird one, because as I thought about this one, SEO was a media arb that I think took a while to earn, but it's been dismantled pretty fast by the algorithm. So when I look at, and this is kind of using subscription services like SEMrush, Ahrefs, things of that nature, you can go and look how organic traffic to different publishers is trending over time. And there's been a huge decline since, I want to say, late 23 through to now, with many publishers facing in the order of 50 to 90% declines on their organic traffic from Google. So that got disrupted very quickly, in my opinion, relative to how long it took to build it. That could have taken decades for some of those folks to build their full reach in SEO. So I guess that's number one. Number two, the next observation here is many companies start as media arbs. I don't think all of them do, but many do, especially in fintech lending. They've developed a product for a particular segment, and then they figure out what channels they can arbitrage. Affiliate is usually in that mix. Direct mail is usually a fast follower or the first. And then companies start playing with Google and Facebook. And those last two tend to be much harder, in kind of my observation of the space. Companies don't start by giving. So the brand arbitrage, that just takes longer, right? So if companies launched and took VC and said, hey, my strategy is to give endlessly on content and on social and to start a newsletter and a podcast, and I'm not going to monetize for 4 years, I'm guessing they wouldn't have that much luck drumming up VC money, because they might burn a lot of money before demonstrating that they actually have unit economics that work and that they actually have sales and transactions. It just seems like an impractical way to get started. Though I have seen plenty of companies that start as brand arbitrage. They build their personal brands first, and then they decide how they want to monetize it. You got to start somewhere. That's kind of the point. And media arb is as good a place as any to start it. So I just don't think anyone should feel bad that they don't really have a brand marketing presence, because that takes longer and it's harder to cold start. So the next observation, this one we kind of dialed in on that podcast that hopefully I'll republish here in December. But this was an interesting one. I think it's something I've always felt and noticed, but couldn't really articulate all that well. What I think it is companies that are great at the media arbitrage aren't great at the brand arbitrage. And I also think the opposite is true. The brand arbitragers aren't good at the media arbitragers. And it really just boils down to, I think, kind of art and science. Media arbitrage is way more science. How much should I pay for that click? What keyword should I bid on? What does my landing page look like? Let me run A/B tests. There's just a heck of a lot of math involved in media arbitrage. Not that there isn't art. There 100% is a lot of art to landing page and copy and all of that. But it feels a little bit more mathy and quant to me than the brand arbitrage, where you're telling stories and you're trying to make people feel a certain way with your content, and you're trying to say your message in a way that people want to share it, and you get word of mouth. That's what I observe. So if I look at fintechs here for a second, fintech lenders, those tend to be quantitative orgs, right? They're arbitraging. First of all, the product itself is an arbitrage. They're getting capital from, credit facilities at, let's say, 10%, and they figure out how to lend it at 20%, and then they have some losses, and they figure out how to extract yield on that capital that they borrow in order to lend to somebody else. And that's the product. It's a lending product. It's a standard lending product, but it's an arbitrage at the end of the day. And then they find how to arbitrage media and attention, and then they put those two arbs together, and boom, they have a business. The cast of characters that would be good at the former story, those two arbitrages, those two math problems, probably aren't going to be the same cast of characters that are going to build a phenomenal story and brand and narrative that creates magnetic attraction to their business, and vice versa. The people that are good at that storytelling stuff aren't gonna probably be the same folks that figure out those two arbitrages. That's a lot of quant work that takes decades to get good at, and vice versa. Next big observation, I've talked about this one before in some of my writing on the free toaster, and in particular, if you haven't read the New Balance article, it is by far our most popular article. I also have a podcast on it, and it was the story of how the New Balance CEO successfully did this. He walked into a business that spent 70% of its money on media arbitrage, and he flipped it. He spent 70% of the money on brand marketing, and it was a bumpy ride, but he got it to work. So you should check out that story. But one of the key points in that story is that your give to ask ratio needs to be very high in order to sustainably grow over years and decades. And the give to ask ratio, here's an easy way to imagine it. Like big broadcast studios, let's say your NBC, your ABC, your TV broadcast studio, when they put content out there, let's say you're watching Jeopardy, you're going to get about 3-to-1 content for half an hour. So 22.5 minutes is going to be the show itself. 7.5 minutes is going to be commercials. Their way of monetizing that attention. And 3-to-1 is what Alex Hormozy proposes on his podcast. Academic research on this stuff gets to like 70-30, so close to 3-to-1. I personally like to be at I don't have a way to measure my give to ask ratio, but I'd like to think it's 10-to-1 or higher. My point here is I think there's an opportunity in fintech lending and fintech in general to increase the give to ask ratio. This is going to be unpopular with your CFO, by the way. You're going to get questions on like, why are we spending all this money or doing all this stuff if we don't know what we're getting back? I've seen it very clearly in my business. The more I give, the more I get back. And I talk to a lot of content creators that can say the same, but it's a different game in the consumer. I'll acknowledge that. I'm in B2B. So for me, I think it's a little bit more clear and obvious. In consumer, I do think it's much harder, but I do think the principle still applies. The next observation is in a world of AI search, I do think brand is going to be a big arbitrage. And I want to say more about what I mean here. So I'm already doing this, by the way, when I talk to Claude and Gemini quite a bit. They're my little digital buddies that help me with all sorts of stuff. But when I ask a question, I'll sometimes caveat it with, and I'm interested in so-and-so's perspective on that question. I'll have like a marketing question or a business question, and I don't just ask it generically. I say, hey, here's my question, but check the following. I want to overweight the following sources when you give me your answer. And that's brand arbitrage, right? So folks out there, whether they be companies or individuals, have proven to me through their work that I should trust them in certain areas. So when I ask AI, I don't want a generic AI answer on that question. I want the AI to more carefully consider what that brand or what that individual thinks. I think this is going to be more and more important. As AI scales, I think this is going to go, and maybe we're 5 years, 10 years away, who knows? But I think the most natural format for AI conversations is actually voice. I actually don't want to type all this stuff. I don't want to read all this stuff. I want to have a natural conversation, ask my question, get a short answer, go back and forth. That feels comfortable, easy, convenient. Do I think text is going away? Of course not. I just think the voice form factor is going to really rise with LLMs and what they're capable of. So, and again, if you want to exist in search, the game of the SEO game's kind of over. So there's a new game here inside the LLMs, and I think there'll be some version of SEO. There'll be that version of a game to play, but ideally you want the customer searching for the question they have to think of you and to say, hey, I have a question on retirement. What would Charles Schwab advise that I think about? How much can I withdraw per year from my nest eggs? Things like that. Whereas a generic answer versus a trusted source are two very different levels of trust. So another observation here, the brand arb, I think I've hinted at this, but just to say it directly, I think fintechs shy away from this one because it takes a long time to build a brand arbitrage. And again, a brand arbitrage we're defining as you've given so much value to your audience, whether it be through content or through something you believe in, a social message. There's a lot of ways to give. Entertainment, a lot of ways to give. The word of mouth that they hear about your product because it's such high value, that could be brand arbitrage. But it takes a long time to build it. But once you've built it, it's much harder to kill it. If and I'll kind of use my business here as an example. If I stopped posting on LinkedIn tomorrow, I think probably my business would be fine for a quarter or two, maybe even a year. I still think, my existing clients would eventually run off. I might bump into some new clients. So I might be able to coast for a while without investing too much in brand and content. What do I think would happen if I did that for 5 years? I think my business would be dead. I think I'd have absolutely no business whatsoever, and that would just be that. How long it would take for that to fully extinguish, I have no idea, but I don't really want to find out. But the point is that, like, if, let's say, LinkedIn banned me tomorrow, full stop, they banned me. I couldn't post ever or connect with people there. I'd have to go build up on Twitter and on Substack and double down on the newsletter and on this podcast and maybe run some paid media to my stuff so people discover it. But I'd have a time period there, maybe 6 months to a year, where I could figure that out because I know I have a tail on the brand equity that I've built so far. And I think many companies with great brands would say the same thing. Versus if a media arb dried out, if 95% of my business comes from paid search and 5 new entrants came in tomorrow that were willing to outbid me on the exact keywords I buy, I'm toast. I'm done. Like, I have to go figure out something else. I'm not getting a tail of traffic and new business for 6 months. Like, my new business acquisition goes from 100 to 5 because 95% of it was that. And yeah, and I'm going to have to hustle and figure that out. And I'll find another media arb. I don't get the benefit of kind of the smoothing that happens when I've built brand equity. So that's the value you kind of get. And then the final point here, I think brand arbs can take 2 forms, like 2 basic forms. One is an attention arbitrage. So people hear about your stuff probably because you're writing content that's helpful, or because you've built such a good product that people talk about it and you get word of mouth and people come to you. I call that the attention arbitrage. But what attention arbitrage does is it draws people to you. They knock on your door, they find your website, they put in orders, etc. That's an attention arbitrage. Then another one is a conversion arbitrage. This is one I think the banks, yeah, let's just say like the big banks, Chase, Cap One, Amex, they're probably here in a lot of ways. Well, they're on, but they cut across both. But let me give the example of these TV commercials that aren't that entertaining and aren't that useful from a context perspective. Like, why are they doing that? Is because they want their name to be familiar. They want you to have a high degree of familiarity with their name and their brand, so that when they send you a mail piece, or you see them in the Google result, or you see them on Credit Karma, you're more likely to click and buy their stuff. And that's kind of the familiarity factor. So that to me is a conversion related arbitrage. You may not go out on your own and seek them just based on that commercial you saw. Because again, the commercial was kind of fluff. You know, it was some guy with his kids and his dog and their brand's there. And okay, cool, feel good, whatever. But they didn't explain their product. They didn't explain what they believe in. It was just kind of this warm and fuzzy message about we're here for you or whatever. But it creates familiarity bias, which actually does help your conversion rates. So that's the reason brands are doing that. And I think the best brand marketing does both. It's an attention arb and a conversion arb. But those are 2 ways to think about what is your brand marketing accomplishing. Is it making people come to your door, or is it making people convert when they have a problem? I think my content and my approach, I think it's doing both. I think it has to be doing both because I don't do any paid media stuff. So yes, people find me and they come to me. And yes, I think when someone comes through my funnel, my content funnel, they convert at a very different rate than a cold intro I get from a stranger. So some takeaways here. If you're a fintech business and you want to build a durable, long-lasting business that goes for decades, what are some things you should do? So 1, give more than you ask. 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Very few brands are doing this. So in a way, this could be the biggest arbitrage because it's the most differentiated. Number 2, have a diversified set of communication channels with potential customers. This is so that when one of your arbitrages fades, your paid media arbitrage, your algo arbitrage, whether it's Google or it's Facebook or it's Instagram. Many companies have some kind of algo arbitrage, but the algos don't have to favor you forever and they could change. So over-reliance on any given channel, that's a risk. And when that manifests, you have a lot of rebuilding to do. So diversifying is a prudent thing if durability is important to you. 3rd, they own as many direct channels as they can. The question here on direct channel, like what does this even mean? Could it be easily and quickly disrupted by a third party? That's the question you got to ask yourself. Could it be easily and quickly disrupted by a third party? Many publishers didn't think SEO could be easily and quickly disrupted by Google. Maybe they did. I don't know. maybe they lived with that risk. But that is it's a question to ask yourself. And the more you directly control communication with your customer, the better. So your own email list, your own show, your own whatever, your own live events, whatever it might be, where people come directly to you and there's no one in between. And then the last point, I hit on this before, but I think it's worth reiterating, that many fintech lenders should start to develop a self-awareness that maybe they aren't great brand marketers. Maybe they're not great at giving, quote unquote. Maybe those companies should be looking for partnerships with people or companies who are great at that, who lack what they have, which is greatness on these other fronts, on more quantitative things and on creating durable and really high quality lending products. So those are some, I think, more structured thoughts than I offered on the podcast. I still think I can tighten a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to come back to this episode, re-listen to it in a week or two, keep reflecting here and see if I maybe publish something in writing that really distills some of this media arbitrage versus brand arbitrage, like observations that I've had personally, and maybe share some of the direct experiences I've had that led me there. So anyways, hope this was helpful. If you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, please consider doing so. You can find us at thefreetoaster.com, and I look forward to seeing you again here soon.